Welcome to Moonlight Audiobook. Tonight, we invite you into a world of elegance, secrets, and deception. A shadow falls over high society as Hercule Poirot, the world's most meticulous detective, steps into a mystery where every alibi glitters and every motive cuts deep. In Hercule Poirot, Lord Edgware dies. The truth lies hidden beneath charm, ambition, and betrayal. Let us begin. Chapter 1. A Shadow over Mayfair. London glittered that evening, the air brushed with the warmth of early summer and the hum of motorcars weaving past Mayfair's grand facades. Behind the gilded gates of Grosvenor Square, a reception of considerable splendor was underway. The host, Lord Edgware, a man both envied and loathed in equal measure, had gathered a select party of the capital's elite under his opulent roof. Champagne flowed, diamonds flashed, and beneath the polished veneer, tensions stirred. Lord Edgware himself was a man of contradictions, cultured yet caustic, generous yet cruel. His fortune, inherited and expanded through shrewd investments, had purchased him a title, a town mansion, and a reputation for both scandal and charm. He was, in every sense, the sort of man who made enemies, yet no one expected his sudden death. It happened at precisely 10:30. A footman, sent upstairs to fetch his lordship for the next course, returned pale and stammering. The drawing-room fell silent as he announced in a trembling voice that Lord Edgware was dead, slumped in his private study, a look of frozen surprise on his face and a single wound at the base of his skull. No sign of forced entry, no missing valuables. Just death, cold and inexplicable. The guests, ladies in silk and gentlemen in evening coats, gathered in anxious clusters. The household staff stood at the edges, whispering in dread. And at the heart of the storm stood Lady Edgware, young, beautiful, and dangerously composed. She had not wept. She had not fainted. She merely asked for a brandy, sipped it delicately, and remarked that it was bound to happen sooner or later. The police were summoned, of course. Inspector Matthews of Scotland Yard arrived with his usual gruff efficiency, barking orders and sealing off the study. But the room offered little to satisfy even the most methodical of examinations. The window was latched, the desk drawers untouched. The only notable detail was the open letter on the blotter, half-finished and unsigned, addressed simply, "To whom it may concern." By midnight, the party had become a prison. None were permitted to leave until statements were taken. And what a collection of suspects it was. Lady Edgware, the cold and calculating widow, long rumored to be seeking a divorce. Captain Ronald March, a penniless aristocrat and guest of the deceased, who had been overheard quarreling with Lord Edgware over an unpaid debt. Miss Vivienne Lamarck, a glamorous stage actress and former mistress of the victim, whose career Lord Edgware had both promoted and later tried to destroy. Dr. Charles Bevington, a trusted family physician, who had been in attendance that evening under the pretext of a routine check-in, though no one could quite say why. And Mr. Harold Fenton, Lord Edgware's secretary, a quiet, nervous man whose loyalty was unquestioned, or perhaps unquestioned too blindly. Each of them had reason to despise the man. Each had opportunity. And yet, as Inspector Matthews growled in frustration, none of it made sense. There was no murder weapon found, no witness to the act, and, most strangely of all, no clear cause of death. The physician's initial examination revealed no obvious trauma save for the faint bruise at the base of the skull. No blood, no blunt instrument, just that small, dark mark. By the next morning, the case had already found its way into the papers. "Mysterious Death of Lord Edgware Baffles Yard," read the headline of the Daily Gazette. Beneath the ink and speculation, however, the truth remained maddeningly elusive. It was on the second day that Hercule Poirot entered the scene. He arrived not at the behest of Scotland Yard, but by personal invitation from Lady Edgware herself. She had heard of the Belgian detective's singular reputation, his little grey cells, his methodical brilliance, and his peculiar knack for uncovering the truths others overlooked. And though she would not say it aloud, there was an unmistakable glimmer of fear in her eyes when she requested his help. Poirot stepped from the taxi outside Grosvenor Square with his usual elegance. Immaculate suit, polished shoes, and his trademark moustaches curved to perfection. He paused for a moment, gazing up at the stone facade of the mansion, and muttered softly in French, "La maison de mensonges. Let us see what truths it conceals." Inside, he was greeted with polite confusion. Inspector Matthews was less than pleased to see him, but Poirot merely bowed slightly, remarking with dry charm, "I am here only as a humble guest, mon ami. I observe, I do not intrude." He began, as always, not with the scene of the crime, but with the people. Poirot believed firmly that the psychology of murder preceded the mechanics. A wound, a weapon. These were but afterthoughts to the mind that willed the act. And so he sat with each suspect in turn, offering them tea, complimenting their attire, and all the while observing every flicker of hesitation, every misplaced word. Lady Edgware, for instance, insisted she had been in the salon with 3 other guests at the time of her husband's death. Poirot listened patiently, nodding with apparent sympathy, and then asked, ever so gently, "And yet, madam, you wore your gloves indoors. Was that for warmth or concealment?" Captain March bristled under Poirot's gaze. "I told the Yard everything," he snapped. "I was in the smoking room, alone." Poirot simply tilted his head. "Alone, yes, but not unobserved. The butler recalls you leaving the room at 10:15. The death occurred at 10:30. That gives you precisely 15 minutes, does it not?" Miss Lamarck, dramatic as ever, claimed to be heartbroken. "He ruined me, Monsieur Poirot, but I would never kill him. I am an actress, not a villain." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "But are you not both, mademoiselle, when the role requires it?" By the close of the day, Poirot had spoken with them all. He had toured the study, examined the letter, even taken note of the slight misalignment of the books on the lower shelf, a detail no one else had considered worthy of mention. Yet still, he made no declaration, no accusation, only a quiet remark to Inspector Matthews as he prepared to depart. "Mon cher, the case is simple, terribly simple, which is why it is so very complicated." He left behind a roomful of puzzled suspects and one increasingly irritated inspector. But Poirot, as always, was patient. The game had only begun. Chapter 2. The Fatal Evening at Grosvenor Square. The day after his first visit to Grosvenor Square, Hercule Poirot returned with a quiet determination. The official inquiry had stagnated. Inspector Matthews pressed the servants again and again for minutiae of times and movements, but nothing conclusive emerged. The murder weapon was still absent. The bruise at the base of Lord Edgware's skull, though faint, was fatal, so declared Dr. Bevington, who had made much of his role as medical witness. Yet how that bruise was administered, and by whom, remained cloaked in uncertainty. Poirot, however, was less troubled. He insisted that one must first assemble the players in the drama, to understand their temperaments, to sense their grievances, to see how each fitted into the intricate pattern of human passions. Only then could the little grey cells begin their work. And so, at Poirot's gentle but firm suggestion, Lady Edgware agreed to convene a more formal gathering in the drawing-room. It was mid-afternoon. The heavy curtains drawn back allowed shafts of warm sunlight to illuminate the gilt mirrors and marble fireplace. The household, subdued yet restless, gathered under Poirot's watchful eye. He surveyed them with the composure of a conductor preparing an orchestra. Each individual, to him, was a note, a tone, a discord waiting to be resolved. Lady Edgware, clad in somber grey, sat upright with her chin lifted, her expression coolly unbothered. She spoke little, only once remarking, "This will not take long, I trust." Poirot inclined his head politely, but noted the rigidity of her hands upon the chair arms, as though gripping them against some inner tremor. Beside her stood Captain Ronald March, broad-shouldered and restless, his eyes darting like those of a man accustomed to concealment. The slight flush upon his cheeks betrayed either anger or guilt. Poirot could not yet decide which. In contrast, Miss Vivienne Lamarck entered like a performer on stage. Veiled hat, languid gestures, and a sigh that seemed rehearsed for effect. She declared in dramatic tones that she could scarcely endure the ordeal of such barbaric questioning, when her soul was racked with grief. Poirot's moustaches twitched. He thought privately that her grief was of a highly selective kind, directed less at the deceased than at the loss of her own reputation. Dr. Bevington, quiet and self-possessed, arrived punctually. His manner was professional to the point of stiffness, his every sentence measured and precise. Yet Poirot noticed how frequently the physician adjusted his spectacles, as though shielding his eyes from scrutiny. Finally came Mr. Harold Fenton, the secretary. Small, nervous, almost shrinking into the background, he clutched a leather folio as if it were a talisman. His loyalty to his late employer was spoken of as unquestioned, but Poirot detected a thin current of relief in his pale features. Relief, perhaps, that Lord Edgware's tyranny no longer weighed upon him. When all were assembled, Poirot began with his customary courtesy. "My friends, I beg your indulgence. You find it perhaps strange, this little reunion? Yet to me, it is most necessary. A crime is not solved by measuring footprints in the dust. It is solved by understanding the hearts of men and women. Permit me, therefore, to ask a few questions." He turned first to Lady Edgware. "Madam, the world whispers that you desired freedom from your husband, that you had spoken of divorce." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "The world whispers endlessly, Monsieur Poirot. I will not deny it. I longed for liberty. But does longing equate to murder? Surely not. Besides, divorce was nearer than my husband would admit." Poirot inclined his head, but noted carefully the gleam in her eyes, half triumph, half defiance. To Captain March he posed a simpler query. "You quarreled with Lord Edgware." The servants heard. March shifted in his seat. "We had words, yes. He accused me of failing to repay a loan. I admit I owe him money, but debts are not settled with murder." "None," Poirot agreed softly. "But they do create tension. And tension is like a string. It may snap." Miss Lamarck raised her hand dramatically. "Surely you cannot suspect me, monsieur." "Yes, I was his mistress once. Yes, he betrayed me. But I am an artist. I wound with words, not blows." Poirot regarded her steadily. "Even an artist may learn new skills when desperation calls, mademoiselle." As murmurs rippled through the room, Poirot's gaze settled on Dr. Bevington. "And you, doctor? Why were you present at such a social affair? Was it as friend or physician?" Bevington cleared his throat. "As both. Lord Edgware had complained of headaches. I thought it prudent to attend, should he require medical advice. Unfortunately, my advice was needed in a very different capacity." Poirot's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. The explanation was plausible, yes, but it lacked the ease of truth. Lastly, Poirot addressed the secretary. "Monsieur Fenton, you were the last to see Lord Edgware alive, were you not?" The little man fumbled with his folio. "Yes, he had dictated a letter. He dismissed me at 10 o'clock. I swear, Monsieur Poirot, he was alive and well when I left." Poirot inclined his head gravely. Indeed. The letter still lies unfinished upon the desk. Curious, is it not, that a man so precise should leave his last words incomplete? The silence in the drawing-room grew heavy. The suspects shifted uneasily, the ticking of the mantel clock echoing like a metronome of tension. Poirot allowed the moment to linger. He understood well the value of silence in drawing forth hidden truths. At last, he rose, smoothing his immaculate cuffs. Miss Amos, you each had cause, some greater, some lesser, to resent Lord Edgware. But resentment alone does not kill. What is required is opportunity, courage, and a certain coldness of heart. Already, I see threads in this tapestry. Already, I note the discordant notes in your harmony. But patience. It is early yet. Truth, like the seed, must be coaxed gently into bloom. Inspector Matthews snorted, muttering about continental theatrics. Yet even he could not deny the effect. Each face in that room bore a different mask, but masks, Poirot reflected, had a way of slipping when pressure was applied. As he departed Grosvenor Square, Poirot paused once more at the threshold, gazing at the great stone mansion. Yes, he murmured to himself, the house is full of secrets, but one, above all, is fatal. We shall see whose secret it is. Chapter 3. The Whispering Household. The following morning dawned clear, the pale sunlight gilding the rooftops of Mayfair. Hercule Poirot, punctual as ever, arrived once more at Grosvenor Square. He carried under his arm not a briefcase, but a small notebook bound in green leather, the faithful companion of his inquiries. Inspector Matthews was already there, his mood no better than before. If you ask me, he muttered, it's a simple case of domestic quarrel. The lady had motive enough. We'll pin it on her soon enough. Poirot smiled, his moustaches lifting with quiet amusement. Mon cher Matthews, you English police are magnificent, for the obvious. But it is the subtle, the delicate contradiction, that eludes you. Permit me to listen, to observe, to question, et voilà, the truth will reveal itself. With that, Poirot began his systematic interviews, each conducted in the small library adjacent to the study of the deceased. He arranged for each suspect to meet him privately, one by one. Lady Edgware. She entered with poise, dressed in black silk, her veil lowered just enough to soften her expression. Poirot gestured her to sit. Madam, forgive me. It is not pleasant, these questions. But I must ask again of your whereabouts. I was in the salon, with 3 guests, when it happened, she said coolly. I have already told the police. Indeed, indeed. Yet I noticed something curious. Your gloves, they were worn indoors, yes. She raised an eyebrow. A lady's attire is not for discussion, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot bowed slightly. Mais oui. Only, the gloves were new, unworn, save for that night. And new gloves conceal what old ones betray. Do you understand me, madam? Her lips tightened. For a moment she seemed about to retort, then merely smiled faintly. You are imaginative, monsieur. Poirot noted the reaction carefully. It was not fear, but it was deflection. Captain Ronald March. March appeared ill at ease, pacing the room before Poirot even spoke. Captain, you quarreled with Lord Edgware over money, did you not? I told you, yes. He lent me money. He demanded repayment I could not provide. But murder? That's absurd. Poirot tapped his fingers on the arm of his chair. And yet, the butler recalls you left the smoking room at 10:15. The death occurred at 10:30. That is a window of 15 minutes. It is, how you say, awkward. March flushed deeply. I stepped out for air. I returned before the half-hour. Ask anyone. Ah, but alas, no one saw you return until nearly 11. Time, monsieur, is the most treacherous of witnesses. The captain scowled, muttering something about continental tricks. Poirot merely inclined his head, making a mental note of the man's clenched fists and his tendency to avoid direct gaze. Miss Vivienne Lamarck. The actress arrived as though for a stage performance, her dark eyes glistening, her perfume preceding her into the room. She sank into the chair with a sigh. Monsieur Poirot, surely you see, my only crime is to have loved unwisely. Lord Edgware promised me the world. Then he cast me aside like a worn costume. My heart is broken. Your heart, perhaps. But your career, that is also wounded, n'est-ce pas? Her eyes flashed. Yes. He withdrew his patronage. Without him, I lost contracts, theaters, everything. But I would not kill for it. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft. Mademoiselle, a performer knows the art of masks. Tell me, did you see Lord Edgware that night? She hesitated. Too long. Then, no. I did not approach his study. I remained in the drawing room. Poirot smiled faintly. And yet, the maid reports seeing a lady in a veiled hat near the staircase at 10:20. A hat, mademoiselle, much like yours. Miss Lamarck's painted lips parted in indignation. Coincidence. Any woman might wear such a hat. Poirot allowed the denial to linger, then merely scribbled in his notebook. Dr. Charles Bevington. The physician sat with professional composure, folding his hands neatly. You were present as guest and physician, Poirot began. Why precisely? Lord Edgware suffered recurring headaches. He insisted I be near, should they strike. It was not unusual. Bon. Yet you examined the body. You declared death by blow, no. Yes, a blunt force. Though the weapon eludes us. Curious, Poirot murmured. For there is no wound to bleed, no fracture of the skull. Merely a bruise, light but fatal. It is strange, n'est-ce pas? Bevington's lips tightened. Medicine is not always exact, Monsieur Poirot. Non, Poirot replied softly. But lies, they are less exact still. The physician adjusted his spectacles, avoiding Poirot's gaze. Harold Fenton. The secretary arrived last, visibly nervous. His hands shook as he opened his folio. Monsieur Poirot, I swear I know nothing. He dictated a letter, dismissed me at 10. I went to the pantry for tea. That is all. Poirot's gaze sharpened. The letter, unfinished. Why? Did something interrupt? I cannot say. He dismissed me mid-sentence. Perhaps the headache troubled him. Poirot rose, walking slowly to the shelves. Monsieur Fenton, you were his secretary for 5 years. You know his habits intimately. Was he a man to leave tasks unfinished? Fenton swallowed. Never. He was precise, always precise. Just so, Poirot said quietly. Then this letter, abandoned, speaks volumes. Ask yourself, what silenced him? By the end of the interviews, Poirot's notebook was filled with observations. Not confessions, not proofs, merely threads. Threads of contradiction, motive, and fear. To Inspector Matthews, impatient as ever, Poirot said, You have suspects aplenty, motives overflowing, alibis that are too neat. Soon, mon ami, you will leap to a conclusion. But beware, the simplest path is often the false one. Matthews growled, You mean you don't believe Lady Edgware guilty? Poirot smiled, closing his notebook. I believe nothing yet. But I see patterns. One suspect fears too much. Another protests too loudly. And one, at least, knows more than they have said. As he left Grosvenor Square, Poirot murmured to himself, "Yes, it comes." The picture forms, slowly. But beware, Poirot. Beware the false light that blinds the eye. Chapter 4. Poirot arrives. The fourth day after the death of Lord Edgware dawned with the city in uproar. Newspapers printed every whisper, every rumor, filling columns with speculation. Lady Edgware arrest imminent, proclaimed the Daily Courier. Actress seen near study at time of death, countered the Evening Star. The affair had become more than a private tragedy. It was a spectacle for society to devour. At Scotland Yard, Inspector Matthews thumped the table with satisfaction. "We've got her, Poirot. The actress. Vivienne Lamarque. The maid swears she saw her by the staircase near the study. The hat, the veil, it all matches. She had motive, opportunity, and no alibi worth the name. It's plain as day." Poirot listened, fingertips pressed together, his expression unreadable. Plain, perhaps. But is it truth? She despised the man. He ruined her career. She had access to the house. She was seen near the scene. What more do you need? Poirot's moustaches twitched. Mon cher, sometimes what is most obvious is placed there to deceive. A false trail, a false light, to blind the eyes of justice. Matthews scowled. "You and your psychology. Well, we'll see what a magistrate thinks of it." That afternoon, Miss Vivienne Lamarque was summoned for questioning. She swept into the room with an air of affronted dignity, though her hands trembled beneath the lace gloves. "I am accused," she demanded, her voice pitched for the gallery. "How dare you? I am an artist, a woman of reputation. Do you think me capable of such savagery?" Poirot regarded her gently. "Mademoiselle, you are capable of many things. But let us speak simply. You were seen by the staircase at 10:20. Pourquoi?" Her eyes flashed. "I was looking for my wrap. The drawing room was stifling. I did not go upstairs. I did not enter the study." Inspector Matthews pressed her. "And the weapon? You had means to conceal it. We'll find it yet." She flared, her French accent thickening with indignation. "Weapon? There is no weapon. How convenient for you, to accuse without proof." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Mademoiselle, permit me one question. Did you love him still?" There was a pause, a hesitation so slight yet so telling. Then, in a low voice, "No. I hated him." The room held its breath. Matthews slammed the table. "There you have it. A confession of motive. Enough for me." Poirot, however, merely closed his eyes for a moment, as though listening to something beyond the words. Motive, yes. But hatred does not always breed murder. It breeds words, threats, perhaps even theatrics. But murder? That requires a colder mind. Miss Lamarque burst into tears, though whether of guilt or frustration, none could yet say. Leaving the yard, Poirot walked slowly through the bustle of Whitehall, his mind occupied not with the actress, but with the contradictions that troubled him still. If Miss Lamarque had struck Lord Edgware down, why no weapon? An actress, accustomed to drama, would she not choose something flamboyant, unmistakable? And why the bruise, so faint yet fatal? No blood, no fracture. A death too quiet, too clinical, to match her temperament. Poirot paused by the railings of St. James's Park, gazing at the ducks gliding serenely across the water. "Non," he murmured. The hand that killed was not impassioned. It was deliberate, calm, a hand accustomed to precision. Meanwhile, Society embraced the notion of Miss Lamarck's guilt with relish. Gossip filled the clubs of Pall Mall and the drawing rooms of Belgravia. The idea of a wronged actress striking down her faithless patron was deliciously scandalous. Even Lady Edgware, when questioned by reporters, remarked coolly, "If it was VIII, then at least she has freed us all from his tyranny." The remark was widely repeated, further feeding the flames. But Poirot was not convinced. He paid another visit to Grosvenor Square, his eyes ever attentive to the details others ignored. The study remained sealed, but with Matthew's reluctant permission, Poirot once more surveyed the scene. The unfinished letter still lay upon the blotter. The shelves, slightly misaligned, caught his eye again. He drew out one book at random, and noted that a thin layer of dust had been disturbed not by hands, but by something small, cylindrical. A glass vial, perhaps? A case for instruments? Poirot replaced the book carefully, saying nothing. As he turned, his gaze fell upon the hearthrug. There, faint but discernible, was a mark, not of a heel, but of a chair dragged slightly out of place. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Voila! Someone sat closer than they claimed. Someone who wished to hide it. That evening, Poirot visited Dr. Bevington at his Harley Street practice. The doctor, surprised but courteous, received him in the consulting room. "Doctor," said Poirot smoothly, "a question troubles me. You declared death by blow to the head. Yet you admit there was little external damage. Might it not be another cause? A subtle poison, perhaps, that leaves no trace?" Bevington stiffened. "Impossible. I examined him. It was a blow, nothing more." "Strange," Poirot said softly, "for poison may mimic many things. A bruise may be a bruise, or a mark concealed, OUI. The physician adjusted his spectacles, his composure flickering. "Monsieur Poirot, you insult my professional judgment." Poirot rose, bowing. "Forgive. I only suggest that sometimes doctors, like detectives, may be misled. Bonsoir, docteur." As he left, Poirot's eyes were bright. He had pressed just enough to reveal discomfort. Bevington, precise and cool, had betrayed unease at the mere mention of poison. By week's end, Scotland Yard prepared to move against Miss Lamarck. Witness testimony, circumstantial though it was, had mounted. She was seen near the scene, she admitted hatred, she had no alibi. Matthews was certain. Even the newspapers cried for justice. Poirot, however, shook his head gravely when Hastings, who had returned from a trip abroad to find himself caught up in the affair, asked his opinion. "My dear Hastings, the Yard chases shadows. They see a jealous actress, they hear her anger, and they are content. But think, mon ami, think of the psychology. She is passionate, volatile. Such a woman stabs, shoots, poisons dramatically. She does not strike a single invisible blow and vanish without a trace. None. It is not in her character. This crime, this was not passion. It was calculation." Hastings frowned. "Then who?" Poirot tapped his temple. "Patience. Already, the false lead has served its purpose. It has drawn attention away from the true hand. But soon, Hastings, soon we shall see." Chapter 5. The Circle of Suspects. Poirot entered Lord Edgware's study with the air of a man surveying a stage upon which the players had already spoken their opening lines. The room, though grand in its dimensions, retained the air of a fortress. A massive oak desk dominated the center, behind which Lord Edgware had so often conducted his affairs with cold efficiency. Now the chair stood empty, the desk tidied only by Scotland Yard's careful inspection. Poirot's sharp eyes moved from the neat stack of correspondence to the cut-glass inkstand, then to the faint imprint of a blotter recently used. He touched nothing. He merely observed. At his side, Inspector Japp, brisk and businesslike, gave a low grunt. Straightforward case, if you ask me. Man like Edgware makes enemies. Plenty of 'em. Too many motives, not enough alibis. Poirot's moustaches quivered. Ah, mon ami, when there are too many motives, that is when the truth hides itself with the greatest cunning. Let us not leap to conclusions. The first of the household to be ushered in was Miss Carroll, the late Lord's secretary. A woman of middle years, she possessed the clipped speech and uncompromising neatness of one who had lived her life in service to order. Her grey dress was without ornament, her hair tightly pulled back. Yet her eyes betrayed something else. Fatigue, yes, but also the faintest trace of relief. Poirot inclined his head politely. You were much in the confidence of your employer, were you not, Mademoiselle Carroll? She gave a brisk nod. I managed his correspondence, arranged his appointments, and oversaw his accounts. Lord Edgware trusted me in all practical matters. Poirot's eyes softened, though he missed nothing. And did you like him? A pause. He was a difficult man. Demanding, impatient. But I respected him. He valued efficiency. Poirot allowed the silence to linger a moment. Tell me of last night. She clasped her hands tightly. I left the house at 7:30, as was my custom. Lord Edgware had no further instructions for me. I did not return until this morning, when I was told of the dreadful news. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. And you know of no one who might have wished him harm? At this her lips pressed together, as though restraining a dozen unspoken thoughts. Lord Edgware could be severe. There were quarrels with Lady Edgware, certainly. There were strained relations with his daughter. And in business, well, his methods did not endear him to rivals. She hesitated, then added softly, but if you want the truth, Monsieur Poirot, there was fear in this house. We lived with it. Poirot made a delicate note in his little book, then dismissed her gently. Next came Lady Edgware herself. The beautiful Jane Wilkinson swept into the room with a rustle of silk and a practiced smile. Her golden hair shone under her hat, and her eyes held a brightness that seemed altogether too lively for a widow of a single night. Poirot bowed. Madam, you are most gracious to see us at such a time. She gave a little laugh. Oh, Monsieur Poirot, I don't mind in the least. Honestly, I hardly knew George anymore. We hadn't lived as man and wife for years. Of course it's a tragedy, but in a way, well, perhaps it is better so. Inspector Japp's eyebrows shot up, but Poirot merely inclined his head, studying her intently. You will forgive me, madam, but many would say you had much to gain from Lord Edgware's death. Her smile broadened, dazzling. Yes, I know what people will think. But I can assure you, Monsieur Poirot, I had no need to kill George. He had already promised me a divorce. He wrote as much only last week. Ask Miss Carroll. She typed the letter. I was perfectly free. Poirot's eyes glittered with a light that was both polite and piercing. And yet, madam, freedom and impatience are not always strangers. One may desire a thing promised tomorrow, and grasp at it today. For the first time, her composure faltered. She laughed again, but it rang sharper. I think you overestimate my passion. George was nothing to me. My life lies elsewhere. I have ambitions, Monsieur Poirot, on the stage, in society. A murder trial would hardly serve them, would it? Poirot bowed. Touché, madam. You reason with precision. Yet in his little book he wrote a single word, performance. The third to be questioned was Ronald Marsh, the young Viscount. He entered with a mixture of arrogance and unease, his tie askew, his eyes shadowed from a night of restless thought. He was handsome, certainly, but there was bitterness in the set of his jaw. Poirot regarded him kindly. "You are the nephew, yes? And by the death of Lord Edgware, you inherit the title." Ronald gave a short laugh. "Inherit the debts, more like. The estate is entailed, the money tied up. Don't imagine for a moment that I've gained anything by this." "Nevertheless, you quarreled with him." The young man stiffened. "Everyone quarreled with him. He disapproved of my friends, my habits, my very existence. He cut my allowance only last week. Said I must learn discipline. He never understood me." Poirot leaned forward gently. "And where were you last night?" Ronald hesitated, then spoke too quickly. "At the club. The Cavendish. Ask anyone." Poirot noted the slight flush that accompanied his words, and the tremor at the edge of his mouth. He smiled. "Mais oui, we shall certainly ask." The interviews continued. Servants who had heard noises, a butler who swore the front door had not been disturbed, a maid who whispered of voices raised in anger. Each added a fragment, but none brought clarity. The case was like a jigsaw puzzle with the central pieces missing. At last, as the household withdrew, Poirot stood by the great window overlooking Grosvenor Square. His hands rested lightly on the sill, his moustaches perfectly symmetrical. Japp looked at him expectantly. "Well, what do you make of it, Poirot?" Poirot turned, his eyes luminous with thought. "It is, mon ami, like a play in 3 acts. We have met the players, each with their mask. But beneath the mask, there is the truth. Already, I see the contradictions. Already, I sense the hand that seeks to guide the scene. But patience, always patience. The little grey cells must work." Japp snorted. "Well, you're welcome to puzzle it out. To me, it looks plain enough. The lady wanted her freedom. She got it." Poirot only smiled. "Perhaps, Inspector. Or perhaps freedom is not always the prize it appears. Let us wait. The drama has only begun." Chapter 6. The Actress and the Alibi. The great house in Grosvenor Square remained cloaked in an uneasy silence, the servants going about their duties with that strained quiet peculiar to a household under suspicion. Poirot had installed himself in the morning room, a chamber lined with books and furnished in heavy oak. Its stillness suited him. It was a stage upon which he would draw each actor of this curious drama, measuring their tones, their glances, their evasions. The first to appear was Miss Ellis, the secretary. She was a thin, angular woman of some 35 years, dressed in an unfashionable tweed skirt and sensible shoes. Her movements betrayed efficiency but little warmth. Poirot greeted her with a courtly bow. "Madam, you knew Lord Edgware well." Her reply was brisk, clipped, as though words were wasted currency. "I did his correspondence, arranged his engagements, and managed his accounts. That was all." Poirot inclined his head. "You were in the house last night?" "Yes. I retired early, shortly after 10. Lord Edgware was still in his study." She folded her hands tightly. "I heard nothing unusual until the butler raised the alarm this morning." Poirot's gaze rested on her steadily. "And his lordship's state of mind, how was it?" Her mouth pursed. "Lord Edgware was not a man of sentiment, Monsieur Poirot. He concerned himself with business, politics, and his own amusements. If you ask me whether he feared anyone, I cannot say. He was disliked, certainly, but he did not trouble himself about it." Poirot thanked her, noting how she avoided his eyes when the subject of dislike arose. It was not fear he detected in her manner, but rather caution, as though she weighed each syllable lest it reveal too much. Next came Ronald Marsh, the nephew. He was tall, well-made, with that air of careless elegance peculiar to young Englishmen of good birth and little income. He lounged into the room with an ease bordering on insolence, and Poirot, who despised disorder, observed him with faint disapproval. "You wish to ask about last night, I suppose," Ronald said before Poirot could speak. "Well, I wasn't here. I dined with friends at the Savoy, stayed until after midnight. You can verify it easily enough." Poirot inclined his head. "It is always agreeable when witnesses abound. And you had no correspondence with your uncle before his death?" A flash of irritation crossed the young man's face. "Look here, I know what you're hinting at. I'd something to gain by his death, inheritance, all that. But I hadn't the slightest wish to see the old brute again. He hated me, and the feeling was mutual." Poirot smiled gently. "Hatred, monsieur, is sometimes a stronger bond than affection." The young man flushed and turned away. "All I can tell you is, I didn't kill him. Frankly, I'm glad he's gone, but that doesn't make me a murderer." Poirot let him go, reflecting that Ronald's frank admission of relief might be either the candor of innocence or the boldness of guilt. It was too soon to say. The third person was Geraldine Marsh, Ronald's cousin, a girl of perhaps 17, slight, pale, with large anxious eyes. She entered reluctantly, twisting a handkerchief in her hands. Poirot softened his voice. To frighten a child was never his intention. "Do not be afraid, mademoiselle. You are here only to help. Tell me, when did you last see Lord Edgware alive?" She hesitated. "It was after dinner. He told me to go to bed. He was never very kind." Poirot nodded gravely. "And you obeyed?" "Yes, but I heard voices later, when I was in my room. A man's voice, raised, angry, and another, lower. Then it stopped." Poirot leaned forward. "At what hour was this?" "I don't know exactly. Perhaps around 11. She looked down. "I thought it best to stay where I was." Poirot did not press her further, but in his notebook he wrote, "Voices, quarrel, 11 o'clock. At last, Inspector Japp himself entered, his face set in its usual expression of bulldog determination. "Well, Poirot, I hope you're satisfied with this parade of suspects. To my mind it's simple. The man's been done in, and half a dozen people wanted it. We'll pin it on one of them soon enough." Poirot raised his eyebrows. "Ah, mon cher Japp, but it is not enough that they wished it. One of them did it, and that is quite another matter." He tapped his finger on his temple. "The motive, the alibi, the psychology, all must align. Already, I see little contradictions. They are like the broken threads in a tapestry. Soon, the pattern will reveal itself." Japp grunted. "Well, I only hope your little grey cells are working overtime. For myself, I'd put my money on the nephew. Too pat, his alibi. Too easy." Poirot merely smiled. "We shall see, mon ami. We shall see." As the inspector departed, Poirot stood for a moment in stillness. Each face, each word, each gesture paraded itself in his memory. The secretary's guardedness, the nephew's careless resentment, the girl's tremulous account, all were fragments of a puzzle. He had not yet the picture, but already he sensed that within these walls lay not one secret but many. And Hercule Poirot, whose passion was for order, meant to uncover every one. Chapter 7. Clues in the Silence. By the following afternoon, the machinery of official investigation had gathered into its familiar, grinding momentum. Inspector Japp, never a man to waste words, had drawn together his principal findings in a manner both brisk and, to his mind, incontrovertible. The murder of Lord Edgware, he insisted, could already be traced to a single hand. The evidence, when marshaled, appeared devastating in its clarity. Jane Wilkinson, Lady Edgware herself, was observed in her husband's company on the very evening of his death. 2 members of the household staff swore they had admitted her to the study at approximately 10 o'clock. She had spoken in sharp, decisive tones, accusatory, almost hostile. The butler, in particular, recounted how she had swept past him without pause, the train of her gown brushing like a whip against the carpeted floor. A half-hour later, when she departed, Lord Edgware was alive, though notably agitated. And within the hour he was dead, the neat wound in his neck silencing his haughty disdain forever. To the police, it was damning beyond question. Motive, means, opportunity. Lady Edgware had them all. The motive, especially, rang clear. Her passionate desire for divorce, long denied by her husband's unyielding pride. Her ambition for freedom, coupled with her wish to remarry advantageously, gave her all the incentive a prosecutor could desire. The knife, slim and precise, had come from Lord Edgware's own writing desk. No burglar would trouble himself with such theatrics. The conclusion seemed all but signed and sealed. Yet Poirot, seated neatly in Japp's office at Scotland Yard, twirled his moustaches with delicate fingers and frowned in mild perplexity. "My good Japp," he murmured, "your evidence, it is impressive. It is arranged like the soldiers on parade, neat, disciplined, marching together to the same conclusion. And yet," he held up a forefinger, dainty, insistent. "And yet, I ask myself, are they the right soldiers? Or are they perhaps dressed in borrowed uniforms?" Japp gave a characteristic snort. "Borrowed uniforms? Come now, Poirot, don't start your fancy talk. You can't get away from the facts. The facts are solid. She was seen entering the study. She was heard quarreling. She left. He's dead. The knife came from his desk. What more do you want?" Poirot inclined his head gravely. "It is true, the facts are excellent. But you, my friend, are like a man who gazes only at the frame of the picture, never at the painting itself. Consider this. Lady Edgware, she is clever, yes? She desires to be rid of her husband, yes? And yet, if she were to kill him, would she do so in a manner so very public, so very, how shall I say, dramatic? No, no, it does not ring true. To murder is one thing. To parade the intention before servants, to leave a trail as neat as breadcrumbs, that is quite another." Despite Poirot's objections, suspicion hardened around Jane Wilkinson like quick-setting plaster. The newspapers splashed her name with bold authority, noting her tempestuous beauty, her unrestrained tongue, and her long-standing quarrels with Lord Edgware. Society gossips whispered that she had long sought an escape, that her theatre engagements and fashionable dinners were merely staging grounds for her liberation. Now, it seemed, she had engineered that liberation with chilling finality. Lady Edgware herself appeared outwardly calm, even insolent, under the weight of accusation. She laughed, shrugged, waved her hands in airy dismissal when asked to comment on the matter. "I was at the theatre," she insisted to all who would listen. "My performance was public, my whereabouts, indisputable. If some stupid servants think they saw me at Grosvenor Square, then they are badly mistaken, or else they saw someone else." Her tone, however, contained none of the panic of the innocent, nor the silence of the guilty. It was something in between, a note Poirot detected and stored away in the recesses of his mind. To Hastings, who fretted openly at his friend's skepticism, Poirot explained more gently, "Regard it so, mon ami. The whole affair is too pat, too convenient. It is what you English call cut and dried. But the truth, Hastings, is seldom so obliging. Murder, it is messy, it contradicts itself, it betrays itself. But this? This has the air of the stage. It is rehearsed, calculated. That alone makes me uneasy. Japp, however, pressed onward with bulldog determination. Witness statements were filed, corroborations taken. The case against Lady Edgware advanced with gathering momentum. "We'll have her in the dock by the end of the week," he declared with a satisfaction that brooked no contradiction. Poirot only smiled faintly, shook his head, and muttered something about the artificial symmetry of lies. His eyes, bright with restrained fire, saw the picture forming, but not yet its painter. He knew one thing, however, with absolute certainty. The solution that appeared so simple was anything but. And so the stage was set. A glamorous actress stood accused, the police content with their tidy evidence, society aflame with scandal. Yet Poirot, ever the guardian of truth, sensed the performance was only beginning, and the real culprit still stood masked behind the curtains. Chapter 8. Another Tragedy. By the following morning, London society buzzed like a disturbed hive. The evening papers had printed columns of speculation, and the police, never ones to neglect a tangible theory, had already advanced their own conclusion. In the drawing rooms of Mayfair and Belgravia, whispers passed in confidential tones. "It is Lady Edgware, of course. Who else?" At Scotland Yard, Inspector Japp was brisk and satisfied. The previous night, 2 witnesses, servants at a supper club in Soho, had come forward. They claimed that the actress Carlotta Adams, a rising star of the theatre and well known for her uncanny impersonations, had been overheard rehearsing an impression of Lady Edgware only days before the murder. More troubling still, Carlotta had been seen in the vicinity of Grosvenor Square on the night in question. "The case is as plain as your moustaches, Poirot," Japp declared with some relish. Edgware wanted rid of his wife, and Lady Edgware was desperate to be free. What do we find? A clever actress, a disguise, and the Earl lying dead. If you ask me, we'll have her under lock and key before the week is out. Poirot, who sat primly in Japp's office, did not appear nearly so satisfied. He tilted his head, his fingers pressed together in his familiar gesture of reflection. Mon ami, when a case appears too simple, it is the moment to distrust it most. You would tell me that an actress of talent, one who thrives on mimicry, would so easily betray herself by being seen, by being heard? Non, non, non. That is the handkerchief placed with deliberation, the false scent left by a cunning hunter. Still, Japp's enthusiasm was not easily dampened. You'll see, Poirot. Motive, opportunity, disguise. It fits snug as a glove. That afternoon, Poirot and Hastings paid a call on Carlotta Adams. She lived in a modest but stylish flat in Chelsea, furnished with taste and just a little extravagance. Carlotta herself was striking, dark-haired, poised, her manner vivacious yet tinged with something wistful. She greeted them with easy charm. "So, I am accused of impersonating Lady Edgware and of murdering her husband? How delightful! The theatre critics will be jealous," she said with a wry laugh, though her eyes searched Poirot's face as if anxious for his verdict. Poirot studied her intently. "It is true, mademoiselle, that you are skilled in the art of mimicry, and that you have, perhaps, amused your friends with a certain imitation." Carlotta gave a graceful shrug. "It is true. I did it once at a party." Lady Edgware's voice, her gestures. "It was all in jest. Actors and actresses imitate. It is our craft. But murder? No, Monsieur Poirot. My conscience is clear." There was a dignity in her tone, an unforced sincerity that struck even Hastings. Poirot's gaze lingered a moment longer before he bowed. "Merci, mademoiselle. One must never condemn too swiftly." When they left the flat, Hastings could not conceal his perplexity. "Poirot, It all seems to fit, yet you seem unconvinced. Surely the simplest answer. The simplest answer, Hastings, is often but the sugarcoating on a most bitter pill. Regard this: Carlotta Adams is young, gifted, admired. Would such a one risk everything for a crime so sordid, so obvious? No, mon ami. We are asked to look at her, to point the finger. That is precisely why we must look elsewhere. As they walked, Poirot paused suddenly, his eyes narrowing. Tell me, Hastings, did you observe her eyes when she spoke of Lady Edgware? They were guarded, yes, but not with guilt. With fear. She knows something, but what? That is the question. By the time they returned to their lodgings, a telegram awaited them. Its message was stark and unnerving. Carlotta Adams found dead. Suspected overdose. Scotland Yard requests your immediate presence. Hastings gave an exclamation of horror. Poirot, however, only grew very still. He set down the paper, his expression grave. Ah, so the false lead dies with her. But note this, Hastings. The one who silences too quickly betrays their fear. The net tightens, but not around the right prey. Chapter 9. Poirot sets a trap. The following days unfolded with a strange quality of restraint. London society, though outwardly preoccupied with race meetings and the opening of new theatrical productions, could not entirely conceal its appetite for gossip. The sudden death of Lord Edgware was a morsel too rich to ignore. At his townhouse, the blinds remained drawn, the household subdued, and yet the echoes of curiosity reverberated from drawing-room to club. Everyone waited for the inevitable revelation that must surely come. But Hercule Poirot, unlike the rest of London, did not hurry. He moved through his investigation with the precision of a clockmaker, turning his attention now to what he liked to call the psychology of the case. The physical facts, the unlocked door, the angle of the knife, the absence of forced entry, all were but the outer husk. To him, the heart of the matter lay in human motive and human deceit. It was for this reason that he paid another visit to Jane Wilkinson. The actress received him in her apartment, still dressed in the mourning silks that bore the faintest air of last night's performance. She was radiant, her smile as bright as stage lighting, her manner quick, charming, and almost childlike in its eagerness to please. "Mon cher Poirot," she said, clasping her hands together. "I do hope you have come with good news. They say the police think I did it. Can you imagine? Me, murder Lord Edgware? Why, I never even liked knives in the theatre. They are messy props. I always preferred the pistol." Poirot inclined his head, the faintest of smiles touching his lips. "Indeed, madam, your dislike of knives is most interesting. One wonders, does it arise from fear, or from distaste for the physical effort required?" Jane laughed, thinking it a jest. "Oh, you are too funny. Why, I couldn't kill anyone. All I ever wanted was freedom. And now I have it. His lordship is dead, but I swear to you, I am as innocent as a baby." Her words, delivered with girlish innocence, were nevertheless troubling in their very perfection. It was exactly the kind of defense that required no effort, no anguish, merely a performance. Poirot let the silence lengthen, watching her eyes. When at last he took his leave, he knew one thing with certainty. Lady Edgware was an actress on and off the stage, and her performance was dangerously convincing. From Jane Wilkinson, Poirot turned his little grey cells toward Brian Martin, the film actor. Martin had been vocal in his distaste for Lord Edgware, and equally outspoken in his admiration for Jane. The actor greeted Poirot with a theatrical sigh. "It's all a frightful business," Martin said. "If you ask me, the man had it coming. A brute to women, a bore at his club, and a snob in society. But murder? That's altogether different. I wouldn't wish the rope on anyone. Poirot regarded him steadily. You admire Lady Edgware, do you not? Martin colored slightly. She's a remarkable woman. Independent, lively, not at all like the usual set. But I know what you're thinking. That I'd kill her husband to set her free. Well, it isn't true. And besides, the idea of marriage, he paused, searching for a suitably casual word, it's not for me. The words were light, but the pause was heavy. Poirot stored it away in his mind. Brian Martin was an actor who knew the value of a well-timed pause, and of leaving just enough unsaid. Finally, Poirot turned his attention to the household itself, in particular to Miss Carroll, Lord Edgware's secretary. She was a tall, angular woman, with a firm jaw and an expression of perpetual disapproval. Her loyalty to her employer had been obvious, her grief genuine, but Poirot knew well that grief could coexist with resentment. Miss Carroll, he said softly, you knew Lord Edgware's habits better than anyone. Tell me, was he a man who inspired affection? The secretary's lips tightened. He was a man who inspired respect. That is far more important. And yet, Poirot murmured, respect without affection. It may curdle into hatred, n'est-ce pas? Miss Carroll stiffened, then replied, I am not a woman given to hatred, Mr. Poirot. I do my duty. That is all. Poirot bowed his head in acknowledgement, but his little grey cells were humming. Duty could be a mask, just as much as laughter or charm. Thus, the days passed, each interview adding another brushstroke to the portrait Poirot was painting in his mind. He had not yet reached the final detail, but he was closer. Always closer. What the others did not see, what the police could not imagine, was the subtlety of disguise, the play of human vanity, the contradictions in testimony. Lady Edgware had claimed innocence with a perfection too neat. Brian Martin had revealed more than he intended in his studied nonchalance. Miss Carroll had shown the rigidity of a woman who held too much inside. And yet, beneath these possibilities, Poirot sensed something else, a shadow that lay across the whole affair. A certain small, overlooked fact, unimportant to the eyes of others, but blazing in significance to his own. He did not yet speak of it. He merely polished his moustaches and waited. For the time was nearly ripe. Soon the actors in this strange drama would be gathered. Soon their masks would slip, and Hercule Poirot, the quiet watcher of human folly, would guide them to the inevitable end. Chapter 10. The Truth Revealed. The drawing-room of Lord Edgware's Grosvenor Square house was crowded once more. The sombre draperies were drawn, the fire gave a faint glow, and a hush of expectancy hung over the assembled company. Each suspect had been summoned, Jane Wilkinson, her beauty radiant but her eyes flashing with defiance. Brian Martin, restless and fidgeting as though longing to escape. Carlotta Adams, pale and tense, her face betraying fatigue. Donald Ross, serious and troubled. And finally, the Duke of Merton, whose haughty reserve barely masked his nervousness. Into this circle stepped Hercule Poirot, his head held high, his moustaches carefully twirled to perfection, his every movement precise. He did not take his seat immediately, but instead looked around the room with a slow, measured glance, as though he were arranging pieces upon a chessboard. When at last he spoke, his voice was soft but commanding. My friends, he began, the death of Lord Edgware presented, at first glance, the aspect of great simplicity. He is found at his desk, stabbed, dead. His household affirms that a lady, tall, fair, exquisitely dressed, entered that evening announcing herself as Lady Edgware. She requests a private word with him, and a short time later departs. Voila! It seems the wife wished freedom from her husband, and so she arranged it with a dagger. What could be more simple? Jane Wilkinson gave a cold laugh. Exactly. And it wasn't me. I was dining out. Ask anybody. Poirot inclined his head. Ah, madam, your alibi. Yes, you were seen, unmistakably seen, at the dinner in the company of others. And so the police are baffled. They say, if Lady Edgware was not there, who was this woman? He paused, letting the silence thicken. It was, of course, an impersonation. A most clever impersonation, by one whose art was mimicry itself, Mademoiselle Carlotta Adams. A collective murmur swept through the room. Carlotta's hands clenched upon her lap, but she said nothing. Poirot raised a finger. Yet let us be precise. Mademoiselle Adams is not the murderess. None. She was engaged by another. She received a letter and money, instructing her to impersonate Lady Edgware and visit the house. To her, it was but a jest, a game of the theatre. She went, she played her part, she departed. Only later did she discover that the game had become a trap. That is why, Miss Amos, Carlotta Adams was silenced with a fatal dose of veronal. She knew too much. Carlotta's lips trembled. I suspected, yes, but I never meant, she broke off, covering her face. Poirot continued gently, no, mademoiselle, you are guilty only of knavery. The true criminal is another, one who sought freedom, wealth, and position, and who possessed the cold audacity to weave this plot. His gaze moved to Jane Wilkinson. She did not flinch, but her eyes narrowed dangerously. Lady Edgware, said Poirot softly, it was you. There was a sharp intake of breath from the company. Jane rose, her chin high, her smile mocking. Ridiculous. I wasn't even there. Poirot raised his hand. Permit me. The alibi, yes, it was manufactured. You were clever, très astucious. You arranged for Carlotta Adams to impersonate you at Lord Edgware's house while you secured your own appearance at the dinner. But, my lady, you miscalculated in one respect, the psychology. Carlotta Adams, a mimic, she could reproduce the voice, the gestures, but she could not reproduce the ruthlessness, the cold determination that lay in you. When you yourself went later that evening, once the household believed you had already departed, you encountered your husband alone and ended his life. Jane's eyes glittered. And where is your proof, M. Poirot? The proof, madam, is in your words and in your haste. You spoke to me, before the murder, of your wish to be rid of Lord Edgware, so very frankly. Such openness, it was a screen. Then, too, the letter Carlotta Adams received bore traces of your own peculiar phrasing. And when poor Donald Ross, the keen observer, hinted that he knew too much, it sealed his fate. You silenced him also, did you not? The room was still as death. Jane's mask cracked. For an instant the mask of charm and beauty fell, revealing something cold and merciless beneath. She laughed again, but now the laugh was sharp, brittle. You think you've trapped me? Perhaps. But what is one to do, M. Poirot, when life offers such opportunities? I wanted freedom, I wanted the Duke, and I nearly succeeded. The Duke of Merton rose, pale as ivory. Jane, how could you? She cut him off with a contemptuous gesture. Don't be so shocked. You knew I'd stop at nothing. At that moment, Inspector Japp, who had been standing quietly in the background, stepped forward. That's enough, Lady Edgware. You'll come along with me. Jane's eyes blazed with sudden fury, but she said nothing more. The door closed behind her as she was escorted away. A long silence followed. The weight of revelation hung in the air, heavy and inevitable. At last, Poirot drew his handkerchief from his pocket and delicately flicked an invisible speck of dust from his sleeve. It is curious, is it not? He remarked softly. The human heart, so full of dreams, of ambition, of vanity. It is never satisfied. To some, marriage is a prison. To others, a stepping stone. And yet always, always, comes the tragic folly when one seeks to cut through life's knots with the blade of murder. Ah, Miss Amos, it is a great error. For murder, it solves nothing, it only reveals. He glanced toward Hastings, who had watched in rapt silence. And so, mon cher ami, the case is closed. Lord Edgware is avenged. And once more, it is the little grey cells that have triumphed.